time aboard. This is the Miles to Go podcast. And now here's your host, Ed Pizza.
Hey guys, welcome back to the Miles to Go podcast. Mr. Kerr and I are somehow shockingly both home while we're recording, which will probably not be the case for the next 6 weeks, based on both his travel schedule and my travel schedule. But we may actually record in person at a destination to be named later.
Twice.
Mr. Kerr, how the heck are you?
Actually.
Oh, really? That is twice. That's right. I'm babysitting your kids in Disney, and then there's that other place we're going to.
Yes, that other place. Yeah.
Don't tell anyone.
I won't tell anybody about. We should come up with a ridiculous code word. Just refer to it as spaghetti from now on. When we're together in spaghetti.
Check, please.
Yeah. Doing good, man. Enjoying some time at home. Very busy week, and like you said, some days ahead on the road.
A lot of days on the road for both of us. And boy, man, I got to tell you, we're going to dig into it in just a second, but Southwest is really just run a train through whatever they were, but prior to all these announcements. I mean, I just can't even, I'm having trouble fathoming it all, but we're going to get into that in just a minute.
Specifically sad for my hometown, yes.
Yeah, I would not have guessed that based on the rumors that were out there. And had we talked about it last week, we would have been very wrong because none of my notes had Atlanta in the crosshairs in such a meaningful way. Big tease. But a little bit of housekeeping. He is at Kerr Points on all those social media channels. I am at Pizza in Motion. You can text us or leave us a voicemail at 571-293-6659. Miles to Go podcast, get it done on TikTok and Instagram. Email ed@pizzainmotion.com. So we've got a comment from somebody in our Slack community as well that I want to run by you. And we're also going to talk a little bit of a Hyatt snafu that I had. We'll finish up with those couple of things. But I also want to make sure that we mention as well our buddy Julian, who's been on the show a few times, who has had a number of people approach him about coming back on the show. So we should begin those negotiations now that we've got your contract set. But he did launch his first paid version of Points Path. It's a private beta paid version that runs through the end of the year, and then they'll have a monthly annual recurring version of Points Path with some premium features starting next year. But Mr. Kerr, if you right there, if you join the Slack community right now, you actually get it for free. I'm buying it for everybody that signs up for the Slack community. You'll see some links in the show notes on how to join our Slack community. Weekly happy hours, meetups. We're working on another meetup in November in Disneyland that I'm sure Mr. Kerr will not attend because of his crazy travel schedule.
Put it on the calendar a year ago. We had a shot. November is now full.
Yeah, exactly. And a bunch of channels where you can ask questions of travel experts like me and Mr. Kerr. But also, like I said, you get free access to Points Path Premium for the rest of the year as part of their Founders Club if you sign up for Slack right now. So, Mr. Kerr, should we play some somber music in the background while we start with the discussion of Southwest and what they've done to Atlanta?
Play the little cricket fiddle, but the cut's so bad that dedicated articles just to Southwest, not leaving Atlanta, but significantly cutting operations here out of the hometown airport, which is, we talked several times about me potentially making Southwest the carrier of choice and picking up the companion pass. But man, as it looks like June 4th, 15 markets will leave nonstop service from Hartsfield-Jackson Airport on Southwest. So no longer will you be able to fly nonstop to Cleveland, Fort Lauderdale, Fort Miles, Greenville, Spartanburg, Jackson, Mississippi, Jacksonville, Florida, Louisville, Memphis, Miami, Milwaukee, Oklahoma, Omaha, Philadelphia, Richmond, and Sarasota.
What a collection of cities.
Yeah.
What a collection of cities.
They're also giving up, they're reducing from 18 to 11 gates in the C concourse in Atlanta. Like, we could just imagine what Delta headquarters is doing right now. Like, hey, we finally won. We finally got those guys. To quit competing with us. Apparently it wasn't working out. This also means a reduction I've seen of 300 jobs at the Atlanta base. For Southwest, latest I read was that if they want to relocate somewhere else to another job, they'll do that. Otherwise, thanks for playing. The only good that I hope comes out of this is that 7 more gates available in C. I hope they just don't go to Delta. I hope the Spirit and Frontiers of the world, the new T-gates are already overflowing where they shove JetBlue and everybody in there. Like, let everybody else spread out and make that passenger experience a lot better, as well as so that every time you land on Frontier, you're not waiting an hour and a half for a gate. That would be awesome if we've got 7 more to play with. But I think you and I have a good idea of where those gates will probably go.
Yeah, I mean, they might go to Delta, but the other side of this too is just given where we stand right now with, especially when you look at the city pairs that Southwest is eliminating, it's possible that Delta doesn't increase flying a ton because these are routes in some cases where pricing is far below where I'd expect it. And I'll focus on some of the more vacation-y cities here. Leisure travel to Cancun, Fort Lauderdale, Miami, and even places like, Philadelphia. I think that, like you got a couple other markets in here which are not, I mean, nobody's going to Cleveland for vacation from Atlanta, or maybe not many people. Milwaukee, Omaha, those are business routes. And we're going to get into that conversation about the difference between hub and point-to-point flying. But when you think about routes like Atlanta, Cancun, I mean, the rates to Cancun have been disgustingly cheap. I'd argue that in at least half of these cities, I don't think Delta's going to add much lift into these because they can raise prices on what they already have.
Yeah. In that case, it just makes it worse for consumer all around, which I think I knew as soon as I saw this was, ooh, woof, rough. Because I would have taken advantage, again, if I had considered, probably would have flown to Philadelphia. A lot of these are great baseball cities, which is on the list for the Curs to follow the Braves in the 2025 season. But also Sarasota, Fort Myers, Miami, Fort Lauderdale, like we take those routes.
Yeah.
It would have been nice to have a companion pass on that.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. Yeah. And when you look at these, you say, I don't see Spirit or Frontier adding service to many of these. Like I could certainly see them deciding to spin up, and I haven't looked to see what they have of these, but like I could see them spinning up or increasing Cancun or maybe Fort Lauderdale or Miami flying. But I don't see Spirit or Frontier saying, hey, let's throw a 319 or a 320 on, Atlanta, Cleveland.
No.
So I think you'll see for those routes, which are going to be traditionally, more business customer routes, those prices I would expect to go up pretty noticeably once Southwest pulls back. And I think the really interesting thing here is, like if you and I think about, like you and I know what Southwest was for so many years. For me, growing up, Southwest was a point-to-point flyer. They were not a hub and spoke airline. What that means is they would spin up routes that they thought they could make money on. So they had a route from BWI to Providence. So if people wanted to go from DC to Boston and they wanted to spend half the price, they could drive to BWI, fly to Providence, and then drive to Boston. That was their money run, if you will. And they had tons of those. This sort of Atlanta footprint, I mean, it's part of the old AirTran days, what they took over when they took over AirTran back in, the late 90s, early 2000s?
Early 2000s, yeah.
And, I mean, obviously they made a run at it for a couple decades, but it's traditionally not what Southwest was. I mean, Southwest does really well in Denver, big, massive market, but they have an incredible amount of flights in Denver. And then the only other places where they really crush it are airports where they just completely own the airport. So Midway is, a Southwest hub, for lack of a better term, but they don't have any competition. Dallas Love Field, again, an airport that they crush, but really no competition. Atlanta's just different from Denver. And it just, I think this is a really good example that shows us that even though Southwest had a big presence there, they never really made a dent in Delta.
Pour one out for the fellow Atlantans and Georgians here who are going to lose this, and I'm sure there will be more to come. Right, this Southwest extends their schedule by not very far out, and then they roll it out, and I'm sure we'll continue to see things flex in and out. I tell you, man, it's a very niche wish, but the entire wish I had is my parents live in Charleston, South Carolina.
Yeah,
we're 30 minutes from the Atlanta airport. Depending on traffic, which is getting worse and worse and worse here in the Southeast corridor, about 5.5 to 6 hours to drive and see my parents. That's right on the cusp of let's hop on a 40-minute flight.
Right.
But it has always been a, Delta and only Delta Atlanta to Charleston. So they charge, $500 round trip for the 40-minute flight because they can. Southwest at one point right before COVID came in and said, we're going to start flying Atlanta to Charleston. And so many people were like, oh, this is amazing. Hop on that quick flight, skip the Atlanta traffic and everything. Then they never launched it, and it looks like it probably never will happen now. So we'll be stuck in all eternity on the Atlanta to Charleston monopoly of Delta charging $8 billion.
Or you get extra time on I-95.
That I-16 from Atlanta down to Savannah and then back up to Charleston, that is a long drive on that.
Yeah.
There's nothing down there, and now even less thanks to Hurricane Helene, which knocked out a lot of that interstate right up there. Or you go through Augusta up to Columbia and back down, and it's just rough traffic. So, man, oh well. Maybe a Velo or Breeze will come in there and take on Delta on that route.
Have you been smoking something?
No.
Okay.
I'm not.
That's not happening. You could just crush that wishful thinking. So let's talk a little bit about Southwest's loyalty program. Well, not loyalty program, Chef. So I think there's a little bit to talk about loyalty. But let's talk about the seating stuff on the planes. Real quick before we do that, also want to tease an event that a friend of the show is having, Michael Trager, who runs ZorkFest, which you'll recall, Mr. Kerr, is probably the reason that we're sitting here across from each other, since, as you claim, we met prior to ZorkFest, and I don't remember it. But we met at ZorkFest where you were still doing Award Travel 101, and it was the single best moment of my podcasting career. We podcasted next to a window outside the Treasure Island pool in Las Vegas and saw some of the brightest spots of humanity.
Yeah, it was great because it's like a one-way window where they thought I was a mirror, so all the ladies and gents kept like coming up to the window and fixing themselves, and we were just like, what in the world is going on?
Yeah.
Good time out there at ZorkFest. Can't make it this year because I will be running a 10K in the most magical place in the world at 4:30 in the morning, which, if you just saw that, Run Disney increased the start time or made it even 30 minutes earlier now, which is lovely. But if you're able to go out to ZorkFest in Vegas, have a great time, learn from the pros. They're always drinking the bubbly stuff and the best sweets, and they figured it all out. And I want to figure out one day after I retire to figure out the Vegas game.
Yeah, so the event, as you said, overlaps when I'll be babysitting your kids, since I won't be running with my broken toe. November 1st to the 4th at the Horseshoe, and friends of the Miles to Go podcast have 2 opportunities here to either save or donate to charity. So first off is the code PizzaLate88, and I'll put this in the show notes, get you $50 off of a ticket. And why is it late? Because I promised Michael that I would talk about this a month ago and didn't, so he was nice enough to include that in my code. So that gets you $50 off. Or if you're in the more charitable sort of thing, use code WISH when you register, and Michael will donate $88 to the Make-A-Wish Nevada Foundation. So either take a discount or take a donation to charity, both things that we love here on the Miles to Go podcast. Mr. Trager, I'm sorry that I will not be able to join you for ZorkFest. I have to babysit Richard's kids. So that's my excuse, and it's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Excuse me, sorry. I'm still getting over some nasty crud from the road, man.
It's fine. You're old. It happens. I understand.
I am old. All right. So Southwest and their seating policy, I have to admit, I didn't see it coming quite this way. Maybe I was just naive in my thinking, but what I thought was going to happen was that there would be premium seating near the front of the plane, and then the rest of the plane would be unassigned seating. Unfortunately, that's not what came to pass. So what we have is 2 ways that you buy a ticket now on Southwest. And while there are more than 2 different fare buckets, I think there's 2 ways to look at this. If you want to buy, their version of extended legroom seating, which seems to be, fairly generous space, 34 inches on most of their planes, 36 inches on their old 737-700s, you can purchase that ahead of time, and you also get early boarding with that. No idea why you'd want early boarding on Southwest, since there's always overhead bin space because everybody checks bags. But the downside is if you buy their cheapest fares, want a getaway, not only doesn't a seat assignment come with it any longer, but you also will get a seat automatically assigned. So that means, Mr. Kerr, the one thing that we talked about a few weeks ago when this became a certainty, but we didn't have all the details, was that we thought, all right, well, if the front of the plane is reserved seating and the back of the plane is unassigned seating, at least we can still book a Southwest flight last minute and get our family sitting together. And the answer to that is a resounding no.
Not unless the new policy that they have to let families sit together with no extra fee takes place, or whatever the way this government legislation is on that. But no, you will be paying. I was surprised at the number of, so it looks like the Points has an article up, and they had a little press trip this last week, and they showed the first 737 MAX 8 with the new cabin. 68 of 175 seats, sport extra legroom. So that's like, it's not the first 2 rows. That's a lot, which means there's a lot of upcharge to happen there for them to make some money, but also 175 seats on a 737. That's not the most that's out there, but it's a lot of your best friends sitting in a good old 737.
Yeah, you and I remember that number was like 150.
Yeah, I do. Now, bad news is their standard legroom's going from 32 to 31 inches. So those of us taller with the big knees, it's going to hurt a little bit, exactly 1 inch more. The new interiors look nice, but it's some people like get really excited about this. Like, this is what is this? Their Carrio slim seat design. I'm like, dude, it's just a 737 3x3. There's nothing exciting about it. It's not going to be comfortable. It does look like they have USB power ports and USB-C power ports, which is always nice now, especially for those longer Southwest flights you're going to be doing. Otherwise, man, it's just a seat. And, the days of, it looks like, I don't know, man. You should go through the details. I'm still trying to process all this. And, like, every airline is just lining up into the legacy model. Spirit, Frontier, now Southwest. There's nothing different between the other airlines. I think this was our original point when we first started talking about this several months ago when it came out. And we were like, what is going to be the competitive advantage to fly Southwest over anybody else if, they're going to be the exact same as far as booking and boarding and, now you're just lacking onboard experience because everybody else has in-flight entertainment and you do not.
Right. Their advantage will be the Vasu Raja model, which is their advantage will be when they have the flight scheduled at the time you want to go for the price you want to go. And that's
the network
really
is the product. Yes.
So while you take a quick break there to drink some coffee, I am going to give you a list of all the benefits that come with purchasing an extra legroom seat on Southwest. All right, I'm all done.
He gets 34 inches instead of 31 inches. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, this is one of the other issues that comes with this is that there really isn't a lot of distinction in the product. It really is just an extra legroom product. And we joked about it a second ago when I said you don't need overhead bin space on Southwest. But I mean, honestly, you and I have flown a lot of Southwest over the years. Do you recall times when the overhead bins were full?
Actually, that last flight I took back from LaGuardia, they were asking ahead of time because I think we're on an old, non-retrofitted 737 with the small overhead bins. They said, hey, let's check our bags at the gate so we got plenty of space. But what I found is Southwest flyers, like there was happily 20 people walked up there and handed their suitcase versus the legacy carriage. The people are like over my dead body.
Right.
So overhead bin space typically not an issue on Southwest flights. And the good news is it looks like the 2 free check bags are staying. So that's not going away with the changes here.
So I wouldn't expect overhead bin space to really be at a premium on any of these flights. I'm not an always or never guy, but I don't honestly recall a Southwest flight where I've ever, had a problem finding space in overhead bin, nor that, the incessant announcements that you hear on United Airlines about, we need to check 30 bags or 40 bags on some of these older planes where they've got tons of seats and really bad overhead bin space. So, the other thing that I think is a real knock on this, the model that Southwest had that was different is the product that they'll be selling right behind the extra legroom seats, which will be preferred seats. And I think you and I both have, well, I won't put words in your mouth, Mr. Kerr, but I will say, I imagine you agree with me when I say that preferred seats where you sit just a little bit closer to the front of the plane, but really no other advantage is a pretty useless product for me.
Delta has mastered this right here just by the way that they display it on their seat maps and confuse people every single day who sit down thinking that there was either a bulkhead wall in front of them or extra space by buying a preferred seat and sit down and realize this is the exact same seat as the back of the bus, but they got me for $30 per seat.
Congratulations.
And then everybody calls every day. Happened to my in-laws the last time they flew Delta. I'm sure it happens to people every single day. Yeah, same thing. Like don't spend your money on it. Like it doesn't matter.
Look, I've loved Southwest for a number of years, but I think there was always this balance of, I love the flexibility of being able to do family boarding early bird boarding and, get seats together as a family without really having to sweat it. And in exchange for that, they had a less lucrative loyalty program. It's, very revenue based, and that was fine. They came out with a few unique things where you could change the name on a ticket for a few bucks extra, but not a ton that, once you take away this seating model, not a ton that makes them different from the other carriers. And so we've said this a number of different ways, but I really feel like it's going to be, Southwest is really going to struggle to differentiate themselves. And I think, I could be wrong, but I think this is going to drive them further away from trying to compete with the big boys and more into the point-to-point model, which will make it harder to get value out of them as a business traveler for sure, and probably decreases the value of the companion pass.
Yeah, especially if you live in Atlanta.
Yeah.
I think it's all going to come down to the different fares that they sell and what it includes, right? Because you have 4 different fares now. I think when you buy Southwest tickets and, it's, probably Business Select will probably include the extra legroom, but that's not particularly unique if you have 40% of the plane with extra legroom. What's going to be included? What else can they include? How can they innovate on the program? I did see the announcement that they are going to have a code share with Iceland Air here starting very soon. So now you can connect in, random spots Iceland Air flies, like Nashville, which is a huge Southwest hub. Iceland Air just announced Nashville to Reykjavik service. So you can fly from all over the country to Nashville via Southwest and then code share on Iceland Air. Useful for most people once in their lifetime.
Yeah.
I suspect after we see this that, again, following the legacy carriers, now Southwest is going to have multiple code share partners. Again, they're just going to be a legacy carrier, and not much else to differentiate there.
Yep, I agree. There's a couple other things that are coming down the pike for Southwest that we'll touch on here real quickly. One is for sure, and one is still rumored. So first, Southwest has expanded on their announcement of what the red-eye flights are going to look like. And so working from west to east, you've got Honolulu, Maui, and Kona will get red-eyes to Las Vegas and Phoenix. Two things that of interest there. First off, Las Vegas is considered the 9th island. I hope I get the math right on that. I always forget how many Hawaiian islands there are. But
it's like hundreds, right? It's like hundreds of Hawaiian.
Yeah, exactly. But I think they call Las Vegas the 9th island. But anyway, it's like that route makes some degree of sense. Interestingly enough, they've overflown all of the West Coast hubs. So they're not stopping in LA or Sacramento or any of those other places that they fly, which my guess is because almost all of those routes have competition from the legacy carriers. So they're introducing, cities where they have significant lift and also less competition. And then as you move further east, you also pick up red eyes from Sacramento, Las Vegas, Phoenix, LA, and San Diego, as well as Denver, to places like Chicago, Atlanta, Orlando, BWI. And so what you get is the ability to fly on Southwest via red eye and still get back to the East Coast as one itinerary, which we've talked about as one of their issues. And then you also just pick up just a ton of utilization from an airline standpoint of taking these planes that sit on the ground on the West Coast and lose, a whole cycle and have to be, routed back around to make them efficient. And now they can start the morning in, Baltimore if they've been, if they're sitting in Las Vegas overnight.
You fly in 31-inch seat pitch Southwest red eye from Vegas back to BWI to get home? Absolutely
not.
Yeah.
They had a brutal flight. I think they still do. And I had to take it once, and it was one of those. It's a 6 p.m. departure from Las Vegas that lands at 1 o'clock in the morning at BWI, which, as you well know, having lived in this area, is a solid, 75 to 90 minutes from my house.
Mm-hmm.
I took that once and rolled into the house at 3 a.m. and it was pretty painful.
To be fair, I'm not doing any domestic transcon red eyes anymore. I'll stay another day or I'll leave. I just get jacked up for 2 days on the 3 hours of crappy sleep and then having to go straight into a work day. Not doing it, man. I don't know how you do it.
I'll take it a step further. I don't do first class domestic red eyes unless it's a bed. I did a couple of those Las Vegas, Atlanta ones back in COVID when they had the old coffin class. First class I could get back in, but it's just not, to your point, I'm too old and it messes me up too much. So I'll figure it out another way. The last thing on the list for Southwest right now is there are strong rumors that they're going to drop some level of their inter-island Hawaii flights. And I think, you and I talked a little bit about this when we talked about Alaska and Hawaiian last week. Now that the government has mandated some level of continued flying for Alaska, Southwest can pull back here without really having to worry too much about, ramifications for that. That being said, it's interesting because just a few weeks ago, Southwest was talking about how the intra-island flights allowed them to get premium gate and time slots in places like Honolulu. And so even though they're talking about reductions to Honolulu, which is, the highest volume airport in Hawaii, I'm still not sure how this all resolves with them wanting to have premium flight times. So I'm a little confused on what this is ultimately going to look like. The one thing I think we can be sure of is prices are probably going to go up if they're pulling, the rumors I'm hearing are 20 or 30% of their intra-island flights. If they're going to pull down 20 to 30% on much larger planes than Hawaiian is flying, prices to fly in between the islands are going up.
Yeah. Those planes are flying empty now.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, we'll see. Really curious about pricing overall. With these new legacy models, what are these bundles going to start at? How much is, what are the seats going to actually cost for selecting your own seat? What's the difference between different fares going to be, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, latest timeline I saw is all of this will go into effect in 26, but they will start being able to book in 25 when they roll the schedule out. So, no fear in the short term. You can still continue to enjoy the Southwest experience as it is today. But before we know it, man, the time just flies and we'll be there.
Yeah, and similar to how United rolled out Premium Plus, which was their international premium economy product, my guess is that for some period of time, as they begin to retrofit planes in the first quarter of 2025, or scheduled, they still have to get approval from FAA, but scheduled in the first quarter of 2025, you're going to be able to get an extra legroom seat for free if you have early boarding, for the next year. So it's going to take a while for them to get this fully rolled out. I'm surprised. Well, I guess I'm not surprised. I was going to say I am surprised they can't sell it on some flights and not others, but given where their tech stack, sits in relation to the other airlines, my guess would be it would be very hard for them to charge this on just specific planes without some sort of a massive software upgrade.
Yeah. My last note is the boarding process. So if you're wondering how this is going to go, it sounds like from the press event that it's going to be a very familiar, albeit different process. Basically, the airline plans to award higher boarding positions to elite members and customers who have purchased higher fare types. Though in the absence of open seating, the key benefit of boarding early going forward will be priority access to the overhead bin space. So you will still get a number, you will still line up, but you no longer have to check in exactly 24 hours in advance, because if you have an assigned seat, it doesn't matter when you board. Which to me means I will be the very last person to board every Southwest flight, because I don't want to sit on that tube for 30 minutes longer than I have to, and I'm going to know where I'll be sitting.
Yeah, I think you're spot on here. I understand why they're keeping it the same to some degree, but anybody who doesn't need overhead bin space is going to board last. And even if you do need overhead bin space, again, I think you're going to be okay, especially because, since Southwest is a bit lighter on in-flight entertainment and what they're doing for batteries and, all that stuff on planes, batteries charging, there's just more space underneath most Southwest seats. They don't have, like the legacy carriers have these like big, massive boxes underneath the coach seats to power things. And because Southwest was late to the power game, their power model, generally speaking, is more efficient for under seat space, which means you're almost always going to be able to get a bag underneath your seat if it's a regular size carry-on backpack, briefcase, anything like that. Whereas for me, I board early sometimes because I know unless I've got exactly the right seat type on one of the older United planes, I'm going to have to find space for both of my bags overhead.
The Southwest watch is on. We will continue to follow and update.
All right. So, I think just to wrap this up, I would say I'm going to be really curious to hear how our listeners and viewers feel about this. We've got some passionate Southwest people in the Slack community. We've got a bunch of passionate Southwest listeners. I'm just really curious to hear if this is going to change people's patterns. I know Atlanta, I get it. That really disrupts the schedule. But if you're somewhere else, is Southwest still your first choice after these changes? When these roll out, call it end of 2025, early 2026. Are you still going to fly Southwest if you have to pay more to get seats beside each other, unless you're traveling with very young kids, in this new model? Because it's not just that you're paying for extra legroom. You're essentially now, if you want to sit together, we imagine that you're probably going to have to buy either preferred seats or extra legroom seats. So curious how people who are listening and watching feel about that. All right, Mr. Kerr, we're down to our last two things. We've got my little Hyatt snafu, and we've got our Slack comment for you. Which one do you want to go with first?
Let's get the snafu out of the way. I want to hear it. Tell me.
All right. So producer Jeremiah, his wife was on a cruise without him, which we will not get into in great detail why she decided to go on a cruise without him. But she chose to go on a cruise without him. And
that sounds very ominous. I'm assuming everything is okay.
Yeah.
Not because she hates him. Yes.
It does not appear she hates him, no.
All right, there we go. Okay.
But it does appear that she doesn't.
Don't want to leave the listeners hanging there like, what's going on?
No, we still think that his wife loves him.
Okay, great.
But one of their stops was Curacao, and he was trying to figure out how to get her into a beach there for the day.
Yes,
because
we chatted about what he should do on the. Yeah.
Yep, exactly right. And we chatted about it after your wonderful 2-for-1 deal that Bilt had with Resort Pass expired. So I used some of my Hyatt points for Jeremiah's wife to have a room there the day that they were arriving. So they'd have access to some stuff on site there. And so this was one of the new properties, like the new all-inclusives that they took on, the Sunscape down there in Curacao. And I called my Hyatt concierge and I said, hey, here's what I'm trying to do. Need day access to the resort. I was very clear. She's like, yep, no problem. And then I asked her too, I don't know if it makes sense for me to use a guest of honor for this, giving her globalist status. Does it add any benefit in all-inclusive? I doubt it does. And so she put me on hold. She came back. She goes, actually, guest of honor would be helpful here because globalists get, I think it's called Sunseeker status. So that means that you got access to a private pool and you got access to a private bar with upgraded drinks. I'm like, oh, cool. This sounds really, like this sounds like it's worth it. A, it's a guest of honor thing. So like, I've got a bunch of those and might as well use one of them up. And B, they get, access to a private pool, and I don't know if they drink or not, but like, great, wonderful, let's do that. And then the day of their arrival in Curacao, early in the morning when they get off the cruise ship, Jeremiah starts texting me. Hey, they're telling my wife she has to pay, I think it was $106 per person for a day pass. And I said, wait, what? And so I like tell your wife to hold on. And of course, like, I'm sure you've been in this situation before. You've helped somebody out with something and then it didn't go the right way. And you're like,
you feel terrible. And
you feel absolutely terrible.
You feel
It's
terrible.
like, I call the Hyatt desk and the woman's like, well, do you know who you spoke to? And I immediately knew this wasn't going to go well. She's like, unless you can tell me who you spoke to, I can't really help you. And so I'm like, all right, I just hung up, called back, got an
Margaret,
incredible.
does that help? Who's
exactly?
Margaret?
Got an incredible agent the second time around. And she's like, yeah, these new properties have just been folded in. Some of them have been really stubborn with us, but let me call and see if I can work something out. Calls.
What do you have to work out? She has a reserved room. What?
No early check-in is what they're saying. Yeah.
Okay. All right.
And so, yeah, sorry, that I should have been clear. I should have cleared. Like, they're there at 8:00 in the morning and their room is for 4:00 that night. So she calls the hotel, comes back, talks to me. Look, they're not budging. They're saying they got to buy day passes. There's really no other solution here. I'm very sorry that you got the wrong information from the agent. And this is where it finally does veer back into what we would expect from Hyatt. I've refunded all the points back to your account. I've given you 10,000 bonus points for the inconvenience. I'm really sorry that this happened to you. So I would say just a word of caution. Like, the first agent I spoke to clearly had good information about the property because she knew about guest of honor and all this other stuff. But with some of these new properties, it was a less than ideal solution ultimately to this problem. And I'm sure you've ended up at a property before checking and used the pool before. It's not an uncommon thing.
No.
But in these all-inclusives, where they know they've got a captive audience, some of them are not performing at the standard that we'd expect the Hyatt property to perform.
Yeah, that's kind of my worry with some of these brands that have been brought in, that I'm just like, I don't really think I want a piece of that. But in this situation where it's like, have a reserved room, I'm not even going to touch your room, but here, take the points to get reimbursed by the program. Right. So I can enjoy this pool for the day, that somebody with common sense at the front desk will be like, great, that's going to save us on housekeeping. We don't have to touch your room. Give me $250 World of Hyatt or whatever for the reimbursement. Instead, no. So yeah, did they have to fork over the cash at the end of the day?
Yeah, they did. Yep.
That's a bummer. All right, Sunseeker Curacao, you are off the list. You're officially off. There it is. Not going.
Off the Kerr list. All right. Last topic up, Mr. Kerr, from our Slack community. Tracy, who posts a bunch of great stuff about Boeing and other aviation stuff, has veered off into an area that is near and dear to your heart, Mr. Kerr. Near and dear to your heart. Sad time for this to come up because we're talking about hurricanes. But I imagine you, for the expert that you are in this field, Mr. Kerr, you must be able to tell me about the Waffle House Index.
Oh, yeah. So Waffle House Index is anytime there's a natural disaster, you can tell how bad it is by how many Waffle Houses are actually closed, because they are actually very well known for staying open even in the worst of times. So if you drive by a Waffle House and it's boarded up and closed, you better not be anywhere within a 150-mile radius of that Waffle House. It's going to go down, which unfortunately it really did in parts of, really the entire Southeast this last week in Helene, man. If you're not familiar with the Waffle House Index, worth a good Google, and there are a lot of good articles out there about that.
Yeah, this is the first time I'd heard of the Waffle House Index.
Oh, really? You hadn't heard about the Waffle House? Oh, yeah, man. That's legit. I didn't know we were going there with a meteorological expert, but there you go.
They don't have a lot of Waffle Houses in New York where I grew up. So
that's
just saying. And there's none near me in D.C. I have to drive quite a distance to get to a Waffle House here in D.C. So we
can't all live in God's country, but it's fine.
Sure, we can't all live in God's country. Maybe you'll take me to, I don't think I've ever
actually we're going to have a lot of reactions to that.
I don't think I've ever actually dined at a Waffle House, so maybe when we're down in Orlando, you'll.
You for sure had.
I don't think so.
No,
I'm a Denny's guy, man. I'm not against Waffle House, to be clear.
When you flew into Atlanta, we stayed in the terminal because you had to get right back. Typically, anybody that tells me they're flying into Atlanta and they ask to meet up, there's a Waffle House just south of the airport. That's about 25 minutes from my house. And if the person's willing to take an Uber or a Lyft or a rental car from the airport down to that Waffle House, then I'm willing to get in the car and, drive my part. And that's how I meet up. So I guess we've never had to do that before because you're not just hopping into the Atlanta airport for. So
you're saying I'm special, that you came all the way to the airport for me when you make everybody else drive to the Waffle House?
I got a gate pass somehow and went through security.
Yeah. Yeah.
Who knows how we do these magical things?
That was pre-COVID when gate passes were actually a thing.
I'm pretty sure it wasn't a gate pass. It was just refundable plane ticket.
Really? Oh, yeah. Wow, how about that? Wow. Never heard of that before.
Nope, never heard of that.
If you've heard of this phenomenon, let us know.
I was hungry. Had to get in the lounge.
Right. Yeah, well, we did have those really awesome chicken sandwiches and burgers at the Samuel Adams restaurant there at Atlanta Hartsfield International Airport. So there you have it, man. The Waffle House Index. I'm now up to speed. I know everything that you know. Sadly, I would say that it does look like there are a few Waffle Houses that are closed in the path of the hurricane. The pictures are horrible. So they're as affected. And years and years for some of these areas to recover.
We got really lucky, man. We were forecasted for the worst. We were expecting the worst. Everybody here in the neighborhood, I had gone to the store, canceled meetings, was fully expecting to be without power for 2 to 7 days. And then the hurricane came on shore, went right through southeast Georgia, and then stayed east instead of turning west and coming right here like we expected. And
yeah,
dude, just like expected, the areas that caught the center of what was left of Helene really got jacked up here.
Yeah,
in Georgia, at places like Augusta, everybody's kind of waiting on the first reports of Augusta National, but based on the rest of the city of Augusta, it's not going to be pretty. Yeah. And then the mountains of North Carolina are just absolutely devastated with flooding right now that looks to have wiped entire towns off of the map. And you still can't get into Asheville, North Carolina, and there are people with family and friends in Asheville who haven't been able to reach them or find out their whereabouts still as we record this here on Sunday the 29th. So Asheville's a very special place to me. That's where Mrs. Kerr and I got engaged. I've been up there several times. Was just there for the Travel More Conference last November. And I don't know how much is left of Asheville. So best wishes to those folks, and I really hope they get some help soon. But as of today, everything is still cut off and underwater.
Yeah, and a lot of trees up in that area to cause even more damage. I mean, you say storm surge on a coast is bad. Don't get me wrong, but I mean, on top of the storm surge, I imagine the trees down in Asheville are way too many to count. I do have some friends that are down on the west coast of Florida. The storm wasn't anywhere really near the coast, but the storm surge was massive, and
still jacked it up.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, yeah. I mean, pictures of cars buried in sand, and people with multiple feet of water in their basements. This one will cause a lot of damage. Last count I saw was over 50 people dead, which is just one of those, gosh, man, guys, get out of the path of the hurricane when it's coming. It's just not worth it.
Never understand people who don't leave. I get it sentimentally, but geez Louise, you'll get another house.
Yeah.
Dude, there's so much we can even talk about this. It's been hurricane mode, and unfortunately, at time of recording, it looks like we got a repeat offender coming up the Gulf of Mexico right now. Yeah, so by this time next week, we could be doing all over again. I hope not, but it's looking like a real possibility. So everybody, please stay safe. Dude, did you see how many? We're gonna go off on a few tangents here just because it's been top of mind, but the number of people that they interviewed on the news in Florida who did not have homeowners insurance because of how outrageous the market has gotten down there. So many people have lost everything, and there is no backup. They have just lost it all. The house and everything is gone. It's not being replaced. And I don't know what this. You're talking. This isn't a one-off thing, man. It was so many people that they were, it's in the Weather Channel and local news guys down there, and people trying to pack up and board up, and they're like, they're straight up to the reporter. I don't have homeowners insurance. This is all I have. I'm like, oh my God, we have to fix this freaking system.
Yeah, it's sad. If we go back to Hurricane Sandy, we have a house in New Jersey, a little summer cottage sort of thing, that's been in our family for a long time. And when Sandy happened, the family was given two, really poor choices. And I don't know what, for folks who didn't have money, I don't know what you do if this is your only house. The choices were, we could get reimbursement, and I'm the details are fuzzy. It's been a long time, but we had to agree to jack the height of the house up. I think we had to raise the height of the house 6 feet, if I remember correctly, to be able to get future flood insurance, because we were in a flood insurance plane. And if we didn't jack the house up, then we couldn't get flood insurance. So then you're talking about, then you're just essentially self-insuring. And by the way, flood insurance wasn't cheap back then, which Sandy is what? That was, Obama was president, right? So that would have been 13, 14 years ago, something like that. I think our flood insurance premium back then was $6,000 a year for that house. Ooh. And, gosh knows what it is now. But to your point,
20 grand.
It's a way for the federal government to try and get houses out of these floodplain areas, unfortunately, but it's very much a stick method, not a carrot method. So to your point, I imagine there's probably a lot of people in Florida that are not going to be able to rebuild. They're just not going to have the money.
best wishes to everybody out there, and fingers crossed we're not looking at the same thing this time next week.
Yep, let's hope so. All right, well, ending on a bit of a sad note, but Mr. Kerr, hope to see you twice in the next 30 days along my path of our secret meeting site. I've got Vegas, New York, Disney twice, Lisbon. Yeah, I got a whole bunch of travel. And by the way, based on the way it's looking right now, as disgusting as it sounds, I am actually going to have my millionth paid button seat mile on United sometime in the next, call it 45 days. Right now, looking to be my flight home from Lisbon. 1 million paid button seat miles on United.
I'm sorry, man. That's too much time in an airplane seat for any button on any airline.
Yep, I agree.
I hope they pull over on the side of the road and do a little thing for you there when you're in the middle of the flight.
Me too, Mr. Kerr. Well, I can't wait to see you in, let's see, according to 29, 8, carry the 1, 11 days. Like that math there? See you in 11 days, Mr. Kerr. Less than a week from when this episode drops live. But until we upload again, we've got miles to go. In there. It's in there. Booyah.